So my good friends over at the Darkroom are always doing film comparisons on social media. It's a great resource for film shooters. It's one of my favorite things about the Darkroom, and we talked about doing a video together since it had been a while since we've done anything. And we had the idea to do a film comparison in 4x5, two films that are very different, both color films, but we have a slide film, Ektachrome 100, and a color negative film in Portra 160. I've shot both of these films before over the years, but only in 35 and 120. I had never shot any of these in 4x5. 4x5 is something I've enjoyed a lot this summer, but something that I found really hard for me to fit into my workflow and just daily shooting. So I had a lot of fun basically carving out some time just to compare these two film stocks and see what it really looks like in 4x5. So Molly and I went out, we shot 4 portraits and basically 2 frames per portrait. So 1 sheet of Ektachrome 100 and 1 sheet of Portra 160. Today we're going to basically just compare these results and see how different they really are. And we're just going to go ahead and put each shot on the light table right here as I'm talking about it, just so I can see it for reference. And if you have never looked at a 4x5 slide, a positive sheet of film, it is truly unlike anything else. I mean, having the scan is one thing, but you know, looking at it on a light table like this, it is just insane. And the two look very, very different. I knew obviously that they would have a different look, but I'd never shot side by side the exact same frame to have this kind of comparison. So I'm glad I did this, because while I knew Ektachrome and Portra were very different, this is insane how each film rendered each scene. And as far as my preference, it differs from shot to shot. I didn't have, you know, a clear winner in this thing in terms of my preference. I actually like both of these for different reasons. For the first shot here, I actually like the Portra 160 because I really like the way the greens came through, especially in the darker shadow area. Ektachrome, it doesn't have as much dynamic range as a color negative film. That's just how it is with the different processes. But I was honestly really surprised with how Ektachrome handled all 4 frames. Now in the next frame here, again, I do prefer the Portra 160, again for the greens and just the overall dynamic range. I think I should have had an extra stop of light on the Ektachrome here. It feels underexposed. Skin tones are just a little dark, and also, you know, the detail in her hair and her black shirt. This one I think could have used an extra stop of light, and maybe I would have preferred the Ektachrome in that case, but out of these two, I really think the Portra 160 wins, again, just for the color and overall dynamic range. Now this one right here is interesting because the colors are so different. We were in sort of an interesting kind of alleyway in terms of how the light really was, you know, because we had light overhead obviously, but light was being reflected off of different houses and buildings in that alleyway. And so you have some like different color temperatures all kind of mixing in together. And I think it's way more apparent on the Ektachrome, like under her chin, she kind of has this like warm light a little bit, but then the highlights have a little bit of a cooler feel to them. And all in all, I just think the colors look a lot better on the Ektachrome versus the Portra 160 here. The Portra 160 feels a little flat. It doesn't feel like there's as much richness to any of the colors. It just feels a little flat and kind of washed out because of the light that we were shooting in, I think. The Ektachrome, I think, handled this much better. But the last photo we made, this is my favorite of all of the photos we made for this video. The Ektachrome shot right here absolutely blew me away. We were in this spot where she was basically in the shade. It was pretty open shade. It wasn't really dark right there or anything, but she had, you know, a tree basically completely covering her from the sun, so none of that sunlight was directly hitting her. But then behind her, where the sunlight was just hitting the open streets and buildings there, it was a really high contrast scene. And metering for her there in the shade, I wasn't sure how much detail it was going to retain in the highlights behind her, but in the Ektachrome, I was pleasantly surprised. Now the Portra 160 looks fine here. There's this weird sort of flare on the front of her shirt there. I don't know if that's light that was actually falling on her that I just didn't see in between frames, or if this is actually some sort of lens flare or something, but it's a really weird look on the scan itself. You can see it's like sort of washed out and has this really light blue kind of feel to it. I don't know exactly what's causing that, so that's definitely a distraction, but just based on the color overall, comparing the two, I really prefer the Ektachrome in this one. And it can't be stated enough, looking at this film on a light table like this, it is just insane having a sheet of film like this in your hand. Seeing a positive like this at this size in your hand is just unlike anything else I've done in film photography. And this just goes to show how important it is to choose the right film stock for the look that you're going for. If you're shooting film and you haven't really experimented and tried out different film stocks, this is definitely a good thing to do. It's one thing to see another photographer who makes great work with Ektachrome or great work with Portra 160, but having the two side by side, knowing what the light really looked like and what the scene looked and felt like, then to see how that was rendered with two completely different film stocks, it's very, very eye-opening. So I hope this is helpful for you if you're considering shooting Ektachrome or Portra 160, whether that be 35, 120, or 4x5. They behave very, very differently. So I hope this was helpful for you. And of course, a big thanks to our sponsor, the Darkroom, for processing and scanning all of this film. I love doing stuff like this with the Darkroom, again, just because they're very big on providing information and resources for film shooters. So, and if you're not following them on Instagram already, definitely do that. Trev is always comparing different film stocks, shooting with different cameras to provide, samples of lenses and camera bodies, that sort of thing. And I wanted this video to be a resource for film shooters in a number of different ways, not just in terms of comparing the two different film stocks, but if you're wanting to shoot 4x5 film, but you don't really know how to get the film processed or what the steps are, I asked the Darkroom how they recommend people send film to them, specifically 4x5 film. It's a little different. You don't have, just a bunch of 35mm or 120 rolls where you just seal it up, throw it in a Ziploc bag and in a mailer, and then just ship it off to the lab. With each of these sheets of film, it's an individual sheet of film that isn't wrapped in anything. It's not inside any kind of canister. And some people might think they would just ship their film holder to the lab since it's already in there, but I personally have 5 film holders, so I have 10 photos to work with at any given time. If I shipped out, 4 of those, that would leave me with 1 film holder, basically 2 shots in the meantime. So repurposing your film boxes that your film comes in, this is the best way to get the film to the lab. That way you can continue to use your film holders and reload them with fresh film. So if you've never bought film in 4x5 before, basically inside of here there are a number of different boxes and bags. So this is essentially what the film was wrapped in. You can see it's open because I opened up the box, obviously. But inside here there's also other boxes. So there's another layer right here. Essentially what I did was I took all of my film and put it in one of these, and then you put that inside, then take the other layer right here, put that over top of it, and then close everything in this box. That gives you 3 different layers of protection to make sure your film is completely light tight. There are also some resealable bags and black bags that you can buy online specifically for stuff like that, and I'll link those down below. But that's the best way to get your film to the lab. Obviously, doing all of this in complete darkness, you can't just take it out of the film holder. I know that seems like common sense, but a lot of people are new to film, so I'm trying to make sure we cover all of our bases here. And doing that inside of a changing bag, or even better, what I've been using is a changing tent. That way you have so much room to work with in that thing, and it's really easy to get your film out of the film holders and back into one of these boxes for shipment. Another thing that I would definitely recommend you do is if you're sending, say, Ilford HP5 and you're throwing it in an Ektachrome box, or if you're mixing and matching anything like that, the lab, they need to know exactly what kind of film you have in here. There are notch codes on the sheet of film which can definitely tell the technician what kind of film it is, but I always put like a post-it note or something on there letting people know exactly what film is loaded inside here. So for this, I made sure it was Ektachrome 100. For the other box, Portra 160, but writing it out on there, making sure they know exactly what's inside, that's definitely going to save them in the long run. But that's going to do it for today. If you guys have any questions about this stuff, let me know down below. I hope this was a good resource for you if you're interested in shooting Ektachrome or Portra 160. Not only how they behave, but more importantly, just how different they really are. This was pretty eye-opening for me, so I hope it was for you guys too. But that's it for today. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.